And this is Weaponized.
We should maybe just fill in our listeners about how Jay Stratton ended up studying UFOs and related mysteries, because he made it clear to us in our conversation with him, he's not a UFO guy. He's not sitting at home watching UFO videos on YouTube. He'd watch guitar playing videos on YouTube, but not UFOs. He didn't have a whole bunch of books. He didn't have an abiding interest in it, but he ended up moving from Office of Naval Intelligence over to DIA and became an acquaintance and colleague of Dr. Jim Lakatsky, who was the creator of, eventually became the creator of the AAWSAP program, what became AAWSAP. And Lakatsky had an interest in Skinwalker Ranch, in the book that Colin Kelleher and I wrote. And well, we'll let Jay Stratton explain how that process went.
I can remember telling our mutual friend, Dr. Lakatsky, right, that some of this stuff I don't, and I hate saying the word now because I have so much more background, but the word believe, right? The belief isn't there necessarily that I'm seeing what I think was being reported, right? So that evolution between 2006 and then to 2008, at that time, I had to go to Iraq, just a normal deployment. And because we did deploy civilians, a lot of people don't realize that civilians are just on the hook, just like military. In 2006 and 7 timeframe, as we were trying to think about this problem set, Jim Lakatsky says, "Hey, basically, I made the comment something to the effect of, I'd love to see one with my own eyes," and what I meant by one is a nuts and bolts craft, right? Because in my mind, that's what I'm a technology, aerospace guy. I'm thinking the craft that I can go touch and put my hands on, right? Or I'd like to see one of these things in person. And I was getting ready to go, and Jim was tracking the ranch, and he kind of made a joke, or I don't need to say it's a joke, about a comment of, "Hey, there's one place in the world we might see one of these things, it's this place." And he hands me your book. And I throw the book in my backpack and literally took it to Iraq with me. So I read that book in the green zone and in my downtime. And, before I even got back, we're, talking and things are proceeding along. But so I come back, and at that time, we were at, initially, the Defense Warning Office and DIA was at the DIAC, we call it, the Defense Intelligence Analysis Center at Bolling Air Force Base. Now, granted, I was flight test back in the day as Pax River Naval Air Station, which is in St. Mary's County, Maryland, so I still live there. And I never sold my house throughout this whole process because I liked where I lived, but I was making really terrible commutes. So I agreed to work at the Defense Intelligence Agency and made that commute, and in the process, they transferred us 14 miles through the city to another place. And I can remember the quote to this day. It's only 14 miles, Jay, but it's 14 miles of DC hell, right? Going through the commute there. So anyway, we end up in this place. It's called Clarendon. And it was really killing me physically, just the drive every day and the stress of that. I love the job, but the stress of getting there and home. And in 2008, O&I offered me the position to come back and be the Deputy Director of Air Warfare, which was a lot better commute. And I loved O&I. I kind of grew up there in the intel community, so I took that job and left. Dr. Lakatsky stayed in touch, but that contract, it was already in the beginnings. And then in 2009, if I remember my timeline right, he put it on FedBizOps to be bid, and they had 2 bidders. That I remember, one being Bob Bigelow, Bigelow Aerospace, and the other being a company that I don't remember the name of, but it was a company that did a lot of business with DIA and kind of in that contract world. You have your favorite customers and your favorite, but there were more than one bid.
And no funny business that you can see. It wasn't
none at all.
Tips, scales,
no.
tip. No.
And I know all of the leadership, right? I worked there, worked for them. They're the most straightforward, honest people as you can imagine, and they could not. I could never in a million years imagine them taking any kind of favoritism into account. I guarantee you they went over everything very detailed and made a decision based on the best response to the proposal that they had.
They fire up this program. Bigelow's organization springs in action. They create these 38 papers. We've heard it described as junk science. Do you recall how those papers were received when they came out?
So what I remember, Lakatsky, Dr. Lakatsky, that was driving that, and our colleague, Dr. Hal Puthoff, kind of led the charge there, supporting Bigelow Aerospace. And the idea of them, in my mind, was awesome, right? I'll have this reference document that I can always go back to on all of these different technologies. They did come back being really, I'll say, academic, right? Very high level academic. Whereas we're dealing with the Defense Intelligence Agency, that predominance is a liberal arts degree, and their war on terrorism was hot and heavy, right? We're hiring people who are experts in that culture, and hiring some people just because they speak Arabic, and all these things. We weren't hiring the best and brightest engineers at the time, because it wasn't the need of the DIA. So if you take all of that into context, and you realize your average DIA analyst is going to look at that with their, poli-sci or history background and go, "What is this?" Right? Whereas other folks out AFRL and folks, people with the educational background will look at it and go, "Oh, this is interesting," but they may say some of it is junk science because it is bleeding edge, and that's what we wanted. We wanted to know what they thought as the leading expert on a potential technology, what would be pushing the edge of that envelope, because I needed something to point back to. If I saw something in any kind of reporting, I could say, look, based on Dr. XYZ that wrote this report, that's significant.
You've seen what else was produced by AAWSAP over the 27 months. I mean, it's a lot of stuff, but some of it is pretty weird. I mean, the skinwalker angle. I've heard it said now, people who want to denigrate the program, that it was nonsense. It got off on all this weird paranormal stuff. That was never what it was supposed to be. And it was a waste of money. And that's why it was canceled, because it got into these weird topics that are just too far out. In general, can you address the work that was done by AAWSAP, the reports that you've read that haven't been made public, whether it was worthwhile or not?
So I think, I'm back at O&I at this point, right? So my day-to-day interaction with the contract and with Bass was not there. I didn't have that day-to-day. However, Dr. Lukatsky and I, again, he wants to pick my brain on things that are being seen, and I'm still in a role where I'm concerned about threats to aviation and those types of things, right? So it's good to keep me and the team that I had and my larger Rolodex of experts across the intel community. So it was good to keep me up to speed. The heart and soul of AAWSAP was those technology areas, and the heart and soul of those technologies areas is preventing a disruptive technology. The other stuff that came out of that was collateral. If you go to the ranch to see a nuts and bolts craft that you might be able to put your hands on, and you see other things that you can't explain, no one to this day can explain. Is it something to do with the technology? Is it something, is it an effect on the body? Is it something that's driving you to see things that aren't really there? All those things needed to be studied. And again, throughout this whole process, I'm learning. All of this comes into the forefront later with the bigger task force, and knowing what I needed and knowing the kinds of expertise that I needed, and that true diversity may not mean, whether you're from a certain country or your ethnic background or anything else. Or true diversity may be just purely the way you think based on your own background. That is kind of an asymmetric approach to the technology area, right? For example, hiring biologists to look at the terrorist network and the thread of radical Islam and how it spreads like a virus, right? You take that same mindset to other things, and the various phenomenon that we're seeing. It's important to bring in that kind of diversity. It's just purely the way they think. And I always like to bring in folks with that kind of background that didn't have a military background, because now they're not in this box, in this viewpoint that they're always trying to mold things into. They're coming at you with, well, have you thought about this, right? And that is where the power of those papers come from too, because then you've got to be something to point back to say, hey, take a look at this. What do you think, right? To another academic, or and how can you how could you see that applied?
So Jay Stratton is not a UFO guy. He's I don't know if you say a career intelligence officer, but O&I to DIA. The UFO thing hits at him, and he realizes there's a void there. We need to do this right. There are potential threats. We don't know where they're coming from. So I'm going to create the UAP task force, and we're going to look at this in a badass way, and we're going to be clear with the American public. He also made sure to put that in. We're going to be clear with the American public.